911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Thank you.
So glad you could join us, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us some time. So not everybody in the world knows who you are. So if you would just sort of give us a background of who Steve is and what you do on a regular basis, and we'll get into what got you into this subject. I'm very curious about what got you interested in the Bigfoot thing, and I sort of want to walk down that path, and there's tons of stuff I want to talk to you about tonight. So let's just start with who you are, and we'll move on from there.
Well, let's see. Where do I start? I'm a longtime investigator. I started getting into the retail investigation side of things back in 1988, eventually became a private investigator. So I've been doing a lot of private investigation work, both in the insurance field and in the private sector field. I've done some criminal private investigation as well. Got involved in well, let me back up. I'm also a trained forensic interviewer. Back in 94, I took one of my first forensic interviewing classes, and again took another one in 99. So have done countless interviews / interrogations of people in the criminal sector for quite some time. With a focus on basically getting them to admit their crimes, and also understanding the neurolinguistics of deception, and recognizing the neurolinguistic language and body language of the person that's presenting you information that's false, and it's come quite in handy. But at one point I was also a firefighter and a paramedic. I was a volunteer firefighter for 12 years, a paid firefighter for 4 years, was a paramedic for 8 years. So long history of being involved in all that emergency services stuff. So in 99, I started getting involved pretty heavily into the Bigfoot world. In 98, I read a book. Let me step back. When I was a very young child, what first got me interested in it was when I was about 5 or 6 or 7. My father was watching something on this channel called Home Box Office. It was kind of new. It had this long, gangly, corded box with these buttons on it called cable. He turned it on to this channel called HBO, and there was a show, and it came on. It said Legend of Boggy Creek, a true story. And it opens up with somebody about my age running through a field in this very dusk type of atmosphere, a very scary sounding thing in the background, and he's running, and that kind of got me hooked on it a little bit back then. I also had a godfather that was into readings on some of the stuff, and actually gave me my first Sasquatch book called The Abominable Snowman, written by Eric Norman, who actually was a pseudonym for John Keel. So that was kind of cool. So after a while, when I got my teens, and, you think about girls and cars and you forget about this nonsense of monsters running through the woods. And then I started my career, obviously, and went down that career path. And then it was 1998 when a friend of mine suggested I pick this book up called Monsters of the Northwoods, and it was about Bigfoot sightings in my area, basically only an hour and a half away from where I live. And I was like, wow, and I didn't realize this. But being an investigator at that time, I got thinking, maybe this is a bunch of hooey. Let me see if I can get down to the bottom of some of it, see if I can interview some people, and see if there's something to this or not. My expectations at the time were actually quite low. But as a few years passed through, I realized that, these people, including interviewing some police officers that had seen these creatures, obviously they were telling me the truth. I mean, I could see, their physical body reactions of, jugular vein distension and hair rising on their arms and shallow breathing and goosebumps as they're recounting some of their tales. So that to me is nothing you can fake. They at least thought they had seen something. And when you talk to some of these guys, such as police officers, I talked to one guy who had lived all his life in this rural area and was a former Marine in the Vietnam era and a truck driver, tough as nails guy. And there he is getting all trembling, and, you can see the goosebumps on his arm. This guy had seen something. So that started to sway me that there is something very much to this mystery. And it all culminated really into 2011 when I was up in one of my research areas. Over the years, I developed some sighting reports and developed some relationships with witnesses, and I got to an area which I really thought would be a very great area to keep on going to. And after going there for 11 years, I had my first sighting up there. As I had my team out at the campfire, I went out to my car to get some batteries, and I grabbed the batteries out of my car, stuck them in my pocket, and I decided to have a cigarette. And I looked down, I get my light out, shine it down the north end, which is downhill, shine it down the north end of the dirt road, and which is where a lot of the activity at the time, I believe, was coming from. And I spun around and shined my light up the south end of the road, which was uphill. And there, standing next to the utility pole on the dirt road, is this 7 foot, 8 foot, lanky, tall, long-haired, dark creature. And I could see its eyes. They were glowing back at me. And when I say glowing, I mean that they were reflecting the light I was shining at them. And the eyes were orange, and I could see the eyes blinking. And the first thing it did was it kind of looked behind it a little bit, turned a little bit, looked behind it, put its gaze back at me. And I froze. I didn't move. I didn't want it to really, get scared by any of my movements. And, I think it couldn't really see me very well because I was shining a light in its face. And it was probably maybe 150 feet away. So it wasn't the greatest, it didn't illuminate the face completely, but it did illuminate the silhouette of it and, of course, the eyes. And after about 40 seconds, at least it seemed like in 40 seconds, it could have been a minute, could have been 30 seconds. I don't know. It seemed time just slows down. And after a while, I just kind of shook my light a little bit, and it just kind of turned and walked back into the wood line, towards the southwest side of our camp. And of course, I call one of my teams out, a 3-man team out, which kind of started recording my initial reactions because I was actually the team with the guy with the camera on it. And they started looking around for tracks, and I actually found the trackway that it stepped in, and the dirt was still falling in. And while they're doing that, the camp radios and the base camp radios in, saying, "Hey, we're getting a lot of movement now, moving from the south to the west side of the camp, pushing further into the wood line." So really, that was my first real naked eye experience. I've had a few equipment sightings prior to that, like through night vision or thermal, but those are very fleeting, and they're not very realistic until you actually get your naked eyes on one of these things.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people see these things through FLIR and other things, and there's nothing like that 150 feet away shining a light in this thing's face. Could you see the face at that distance enough to get?
No, not really. Like I said, mostly what I saw was, and it wasn't like it wasn't like a 300 lumen flashlight. It was maybe at best 100 lumen. And, it was before they started coming out with the real powerful flashlights. The little ones anyway. And like I said, I didn't bring a big floodlight. I had just my little pocket flashlight. So no, I really didn't see. I saw the outline of it, and I saw the eyes glowing back, and it just kind of made the whole thing look darker. But you could definitely make out the shoulders and the conical shaped head, and it was high up off the ground. And we eventually, took some measurements from where I was standing, because I did one thing: I did not move. I stood exactly where I was when I called my team out. I knew, forensically, I'm not going to move from the spot I'm at. That way, we can judge height and, distance and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Is that the only time you saw, other than through night vision?
No, that wasn't through night vision. That was actually with my naked eye. A year later, we were shooting a special for, I was shooting a special for Nat Geo, and the crew had gone home, and I was with a few other people, not my team necessarily. I was with a gentleman by the name of Jeff Thomas from Georgia and Wayne and Melissa Larson from Ohio, and we were shooting a special. And it was the first night we were there, so Nat Geo came in, did some very precursory interviews with me to set the show up the rest of the week, because we had driven quite a bit. We had actually come from the other part of the state from a conference to do this to actually come back to do this for Nat Geo. And so they had left, and they were gone for a couple hours at least. And, we were all sitting there chattering around the fire. And eventually everybody kind of slugs off and goes to bed. So I'm probably asleep for maybe an hour and a half. I wake up, my kidneys are calling, so I need to get out and use a tree. And I stepped out of my tent, I looked to my left, and it was overcast. In fact, it had been raining pretty miserably, misting and all kinds of stuff throughout the whole week we were there. But this is night one, and it had stopped raining at that time for the night portion, thank God. Stepped out of my tent. It was a full moon, so it kind of illuminated the clouds kind of like a night light type of glow. It wasn't as bright as it would have been if there was no cloud cover, but it was kind of like a night light. So night vision being pretty good. I step out of my tent, was going to hook a right to go to the tree. I look to my left, and running across the trail to where the vehicles are, here is this 5.5 foot lightish brown creature running bipedally, chucking across the path into the woods. And my first inclination was to go, no, I just got to be overtired. I couldn't have seen that. And the next morning there was a lot of high strangeness. Something had placed a log behind one of Jeff's truck, or Jeep, I should say, and it wasn't there the night before. And there was nobody there. It's Monday. It's April. It's not after Memorial Day when some of them your campers, and it was raining. So there was nobody there except us fools. And sure enough, there it is. That first night, I see a juvenile one. A day and a half later, Wayne and Melissa actually find a 9.5 inch print in that area where I had seen it running. So and again, in New York, substate's very hard. Just lucky enough it hit its foot hit an area where it actually made an impression. So they cast that. And those are my two sightings, just very fleeting. The second one was very fleeting, but it was definitely there.
I think it's so fascinating when people see the juveniles. I talked to Kathy Strain just a few days ago, and she was recounting her getting to see this baby squatch basically at Area X. And it's almost like the smaller they are, the more it freaks you out, because everybody just expects for some reason to see, the 7, 8, 9 foot ape basically, or ape-like creature. And you see something smaller than you expect. And it's almost like, holy shit, I just saw something that was 4 feet tall, and you're expecting to see this 8 foot alpha male giant. So I think it's really cool. You don't hear those encounters often. Honestly, I've talked to a lot of people.
It kind of stunned me, but I wasn't freaked out about it. I looked at it, and like I said, my first reaction was, I just got to be overtired. And then the next morning when they talked about the log, I was like, well, let me explain to you what I saw last night. I wasn't going to say nothing because I was kind of just putting it off to being overtired, maybe. And that's the first thing I always do is the investigative mind like I do. I mean, I'm willing actually to put that same objectivity to my own sighting. I'm like, listen, I was overtired. I was in a rush to go out to use the tree. Maybe I was just, maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was dreaming. I don't know. I was tired. I don't know. I can't really. And then, when you start going, well, we have the number, we have the number 2 here, and we have one thing happen. What's the other alternative? Well, I guess I saw what I saw using algebra.
Yeah, there's only 2 real options, right? Either you hallucinated or it was actually there. You mentioned filming for Nat Geo. I know you've had tons of experience on just about every TV show there is that has anything to do with Sasquatch. What are some of your, I don't want to get into a top 3 or top 5, but what are some of your favorite experiences working on those television shows? Is it just something that sticks out as far as evidence that you've collected or places that you got to go, stories you heard?
Well, what stands out to me is I actually got to go to Scotland, to Loch Ness, Inverness, Scotland, to do a special for Nat Geo for the Loch Ness Monster. Truth Behind the Loch Ness Monster, which came out at the end of 2011. And they flew me out to Scotland for 9 days, and they put me up in a castle, the Eldurry Castle, where Queen Victoria had her Diamond Jubilee back in the early 1900s. I think it was 1915 or somewhere around there. And we had our own chef, so we got fed 3 squares a day, and we had our own in-house chef. And surprisingly, I only gained a couple pounds out of that whole ordeal. But that was a great time. The experience there, being out of the country for the first time, really, aside from maybe Canada, it was nice going to Europe for a change. But that was one. When we did America's Book of Secrets back in 2013, or rather towards the end of 2012, it aired in 2013. Had seen a lot of interesting things going on there. A lot of eye shine, lots of eye shine going on there, and the movements up and down. Actually, I believe it may have been spring of 20. No, I'm really not sure where the heck we shot it. It was somewhere between the end of 2012 and maybe the spring of 2013. It aired in, I believe, the fall of 2013. But I know we had seen a lot of, eye shine. We heard a lot of movements coming in, coming out. And again, I thought predominantly it was because of juveniles that were messing around with us. Because there was definitely a change from about 2010 when going up there, when we started getting a lot of noises and actual audio recordings in that same area. And that's kind of my area X. I call it Area 1. And I was brought to that area in 2000 by a witness who, him and his wife got off trail. And they had about a half mile off trail or so, and something had started screaming at them. And the guy was an avid outdoorsman, been hiking there all of his life. And he looked at his wife and said, "We got to get out of here, whatever that is. I don't know what the hell that is." And he described the roaring and the screaming actually rattling the inside of his chest. He could feel the base of it in his chest, vibrating his chest. So he said, "We got to get out of here." And as they were going out, he could see, something moving dark, from tree, along the tree line, paralleling them for about a quarter of a mile before it stopped. So, and it was still screaming at them for that quarter of a mile too. And that was his experience. So of course he reported it. I got a hold of the report. I met him, and the story remained consistent for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, he died extremely young. I think he died at like 42, 43 years old, tragically, of terminal cancer. And he was a healthy guy, which is really another shame. But, always stood by his story. Actually, 6 months before he passed away, he was actually out on one of our expeditions to that area. So, but yeah, that sighting had always brought me up there, knowing that the behavior is very territorial than it did. So obviously, if you're in a primate territory there where it's kind of acting aggressively, that's kind of the area I want to be, because that's the area that we're going to get repeat type of activity, or getting close to it and try to draw in their natural curiosity, let them come to us. Because I've always been taught that, you got to let them believe they're in control, because if they don't think they're in control, they're not going to come around. So, when you go charging through the woods looking for them, you're not going to get anything. If you try to press them too much, you're not going to get anything. But if you quietly plot where they are and plan where they are and use their natural primate curiosity to draw them out, then you have a better chance of having experiences, or your team having experiences. I mean, I always say this, number one, we are the Sasquatch's television. A primate needs a lot of mental stimulation. We just can't sit there like a dog or a bird and just do nothing, or a reptile and do nothing. Our minds need stimuli. So that's why we're constantly looking for entertainment. And the other factor is if you hear something go boom, it's our primate nature to go looking what caused that boom, or we smell something funny, or we hear something funny. Whereas the other animals of the forest, like a bear, a wolf, a coyote, deer, whatever, generally they'll go the other way to hear something that's not right to them. So
I agree. I talk to a lot of people, some with habituation sites, that they describe often these things looking through the windows, and they seem to get pissed off if they move a television out of a certain room that they've seen them watching over a period of time. It's just really strange, and it makes perfect sense what you said. They're curious. These things are primates. They're curious about what we're doing, and it makes perfect sense that we're kind of their television. I like that analogy.
Yep, and the other cool thing is that very long time ago, I had a friend of mine who was a researcher down in the Oklahoma area, and he was trying some things about their curiosity, and then his actual experiment made me realize something about one aspect of something we know is rock throwing. We all know they throw rocks, and a lot of people thought, well, why do they throw rocks? Intimidation, maybe they're playing with you. Well, I actually realized this, that they actually sometimes throw rocks to see if there's a reaction, to actually probe an area to see if somebody's there. What happened was he put a television out in the middle of this field in this very highly populated, sighting populated area, and he left it up for 3 days, 3 nights. Nothing happened. He had it on a generator, so he had the TV running. Nothing happened. So on the 4th night, he said, "The heck with this! I want some quiet when I go to sleep." So he went to sleep, didn't turn the TV on. Well, wouldn't you know, that night, these little rocks started flying into his camp. And the first thing he said, he got up and he started looking around, and the rock throwing stopped. I said, "Well, I think you just gave it its answer." And and what it was throwing rocks, I think, to see if anybody was there. If there was no reaction, most likely it probably would have came into that camp to take a closer look. I'll give you another great example. In 2013, had our team was all around the campfire. Yeah, here we are a couple of years later, same area. I send a team out. Me and another researcher decide we're going to stay in the camp real quiet, say nothing, and we did. We just sat there. And within 5-7 minutes of the team, actually, you could all hear them. It's like a train wreck going down the road, but that's what we want because it draws their attention. Well, they left, and within a few minutes, this baseball-sized rock gets tossed into our camp. Of course, what is the first thing I do? What the hell was that? Oh, I just blew it. But again, that's their probing nature. I've left in 2011, a couple of years earlier, or I'm sorry, 2010, a few years earlier, I left a recorder in the camp. It was just 3 of us. We left the camp alone. I've got an audio of something you could hear footfalls coming up slowly towards the camp. And you hear this little, and then you hear the footfall slowly walk back. So, what was it? Was it a Sasquatch? I don't know. I didn't have eyes on it. But, very high strangeness. And that's, exactly what I expected from them.
Yeah, I've always been sort of fascinated with the rock throwing. I've talked to people that have had encounters that were clearly aggressive, where they were actually throwing them at their head. And then it's sort of that, almost that curiosity, like you said. I think that's I've never really heard that theory that they're just sort of testing the area. I guess that would make sense with some of the smaller pebbles and, whatnot. They're seeing if they get a reaction. They do the same thing with, I've talked to witnesses that have been inside tents and these things come up and just sort of pop the tent with their hand.
Yeah.
It's not an aggressive thing. It's just sort of a push it down, let it pop back up, hit it a little harder. And the second they hear something inside, they're out. They're gone.
And for all they know, they could have thrown a rock previously and nobody heard it. Nobody felt it. Because, sometimes you get a fire going and you're in your tent and the fire's crackling, so you don't necessarily hear a rock come down. You just maybe attribute it to the fire crackling or something. And then all of a sudden something's pushing in on your tent. Ha ha.
Yeah, they're definitely smart, man. I'm certainly in the flesh and blood camp. I want to talk a little bit about the woo later, but I'm definitely in the flesh and blood camp, and I think these things are animals, and I think they're very intelligent, and I think they have a lot of the same characteristics we do, because I think my opinion is they're a relic hominid. So I want to talk a little bit about some evidence. Some of the best evidence that I feel is out there, and I just want to sort of pick your brain on. You're very investigative, of course. That's your profession, so you know what evidence is, you know what good evidence is, you know what bad evidence is. What do you think is some of the best evidence that either you've been able to physically examine or that is just out there, like the Patterson Gimlin film, for example? What's your take on that? Do you think that's a true live being? Are you in a different camp on that? The footprint evidence, DNA. What do you think about that?
The Patterson Gimlin film is definitely a live being, whether it's a human or a Sasquatch. That's been up for debate over 50 years now. And truthfully, we might like to think that's evidence, but really it doesn't meet the standards of it. I'd love to say it would, but unfortunately, the films don't necessarily prove anything. And the story definitely on the surface sounds really solid. But I always err on the side of caution. Like I used to be really pro Patterson Gimlin film, but as I've gotten older and a little wiser, I'm kind of I'm kind of on the fence about that one right now. And I have my own reasons, not necessarily the comfortability factor, I suppose. I mean, I've met Bob Gimlin. I feel like he's a genuine guy. I love the guy. I don't believe in any massacre theory that was being posed that, him and Roger killed a bunch of Sasquatch, and that's a big cover-up after that. But some of the best evidence, one of the best pieces of evidence I got was in 2006. I actually had a close encounter where I heard something moving around me as we were doing some calls and some tree knocks, and got hit with this very foul stench. Of course, being a medic, I'm used to smelling bodies and all. I've been up there for, at that point in time, say that was my 6th year going up there. And this smell hits me. I'm like, wow. And just as quick as that smell was there, it was gone. And it accompanied the movement we kept hearing and the walking through the woods we kept hearing. Go down the trail a little bit where it came from, and there off to the side of the trail is this track. So I cast this track. The next day, I think it was 14.5 by 4.5 inches wide. Go back the next day, and we find the trackway leading up to it from a very steep grade. The stride, it took 3 steps and 6 feet. So about 3-foot strides, but that was going up a hill, a grade of about 30 degrees. So it was a pretty steep terrain it was going up. And it took, basically 3 steps for every 6 feet. And we actually found another couple of indentations which matched the size of the track we had gotten the previous night. So a year and a half later, another researcher was down further where, those tracks came up from, mind you, a year and a half later, and he finds another track, same dimensions, different toe splay. The toe splay was different, which we expect because when we look at a track, we look at the length, the heel width, and the toe splay. And the length and the heel width should be the same for the same creature, and the toe splay should always be different, which proves it's a biological. And sure enough, here's this print, and it had a toe anomaly, and this one he got had the same toe anomaly. So we have the same, we have the same character here making these prints. And the toe splays are different, indicating it's a flexible foot, because as the substrate pushes through the toes, it makes the toes change their width. Some looser substrate, the substrate will get between the toes, push them out a bit more. On my ground, it wasn't as hard. It was very hard substrate, so it didn't spread those toes out like on the other casts. But it certainly had. You look at them side by side, and you're like, it's the same. It's the same character. So that to me is solid evidence there. I'm also very impressed with the older works of Jimmy Chilcott and the dermoglyphics on some of these casts that have been found over the years from all over the country, where they've actually showed some dermoglyphics on them, or dermal ridges.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I talked to Jeff Meldrum. I talked to him about when I had him on the show, was his work with Jimmy Chilcott and some of the dermal ridges and some of the foot castings and the footprints that he's been able to examine over the years. And I frankly think those are some of the best evidence. I asked Meldrum about the Patterson Gimlin film, and he's convinced that it's a Sasquatch. I mean, that's his opinion, based on the kinetics of movement and some of the things that the foot castings that were taken of the footprints that day. I'm sort of like you. I've went back and forth on the Patterson Gimlin film. Initially, I thought, it looks a little too good to be true. And usually in my profession at the time, that's usually the case. And then I went back and forth, and, I don't know Bob Gimlin. I know people who know Bob, and he seems to be a very genuine person, and they believe him 100% in his story. And I've always had the theory that maybe he was hoaxed. If it is a hoax, then I believe Bob Gimlin was also hoaxed, and I don't believe he's in on it. I'll just go on the record for that. And I agree with you. I think the massacre story, MK Davis and all those folks, I think that's bullshit, but we'll leave that there. But I do think some of the best evidence that I have seen over the years are probably some of the foot castings, because people like Meldrum and other people who examine those things can point out many things. And very much like you see the same example over and over of clearly the same animal is leaving the same track in different areas, and different people are finding them because they have these anomalies, or whatever the case may be with the toes or the foot itself, or, some sort of deformity or whatever. So I agree. I think that's definitely some of the best evidence I've ever seen, and clearly you've actually seen it in the field. So what do you make of the DNA evidence? I mean, we've had DNA studies done. People have collected lots and lots of hairs and different things, and there's been DNA tests done. Obviously, Mel Ketchum comes to mind with her DNA studies. I know I talked to her recently, and she's working on a new study now, and is supposed to have some more information coming out.
Well, I'm not a very big supporter of Melba Ketchum's study, and there was a big reason for that. And I've talked with Dr. Haskell Hart, who actually has written a book in rebuttal to the study, and actually used using her report and her actual studies, and shows where it was actually where. There was for some strange reason, they used a certain chromosome when they should have used another one. And all of them could have alternate meaning. The other thing, too, is I've said this since the beginning, if you have a bad primer, and her primer is patented, that's kind of strange. I mean, if you don't have a Sasquatch primer and you're using a human primer, hey, guess what? You're going to come up with a human. Or angel DNA. Anthropologically, it doesn't fit. How it came out, she never passed peer review. She liked to say she did, but she never passed peer review. Her peer review failed. And I don't buy into this whole, well, it's a conspiracy of science against me. I mean, that's her defense of not passing peer review. I think that's kind of weak. On the other hand, she came out saying, I've been published. But it took the press all of 24 hours to find out that the journal she got published in, she just bought. And it was the only thing they ever published. So, to me, very disingenuous. So it kind of puts shade on the whole thing. And as an investigator, when I see that kind of thing, it seems like, and the other thing, too, is it seems like she's fitting the evidence to an agenda, letting instead of letting the evidence dictate the agenda. She's letting the agenda dictate the evidence. And I think that's the case with the DNA study. I have no, I don't know, she's made allegations in the past that Bigfoot's braiding her horse's hair. Of course, anybody that knows anything about fairies knots, devil's knots, these things have been going on into the 1800s, and they didn't originate here. They actually originated in the United Kingdom, where they thought fairies or these witches were braiding their horse's hair. So this is nothing new. It's a natural occurrence in horses. But she subscribes that these Bigfoot now are all hanging out at her thing, and then she had this alleged encounter where she believes she was, assaulted by a Sasquatch, and it did have a sexual overtone to it. And when you start, talking about that, you got to kind of wonder where the evidence or who's really making the batter here. So I just can't buy into DNA evidence that, number one, Brian Sykes, the late Dr. Brian Sykes, who was a geneticist by trade, didn't stand behind and saw a lot of flaws in it, and Dr. Haskell Hart, who basically gave it his own peer review. If they're saying no, and then it's not, and then you talk to Dr. Meldrum and says no, anthropologically, the time when this supposedly happened doesn't seem to fit. Now we're trying to say that, we have this hybridization. Well, a lot of people know that when you get these hybridizations, most of the time you get sterile offspring. Hence the jackass, the mule, and the horse, and their jackasses are sterile. So a lot of times when you just like when you have hybrid plants, they can't produce their own seed. They have to constantly hybridize them. So to me, there is something not right with that DNA thing at all. I say, you know what? Science hasn't recognized on it. Time to move on from it.
That was the Squatchdetective answer I was hoping to hear. I knew you were going to give me a straightforward answer. That's why I asked you the question. So I appreciate that. Yep. And I, in all fairness, I did invite her on the show recently. She declined to come on the show. Basically, her answer to me was she didn't have anything new to say at this moment, so she wasn't going to do interviews. And then about 4 days later, I saw a post on Facebook where she had given an interview saying that she was going to have new things coming out soon and stay tuned. And she spoke to some of the things that you talked about in that interview. And I have some of those same questions that I would like for her to answer, on my show. And the invitation stands. If she wants to come on and answer those questions, I'd love to have her on. But otherwise, we're all just sort of left to make up our own minds, I guess.
She has had a long-standing policy of not giving interviews unless, of course, she controls the dictation of it. So,
yeah, that's definitely not my show. That's not how it rolls here. So moving on, I want to just briefly touch on this. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. I know your time's valuable, and I want to get to some of the hoaxing stuff that I want to get into with you. So just real quick, just your opinion. Obviously, nobody knows clearly, but let's talk about the quote, I hate to use the term, but the woo-woo factor in the Sasquatch community, right?
Oh, yeah. The paranormal, well, I have a lot of first, let me dispel the alien thing first. Yes, has there been sightings, alleged sightings with UFOs and Bigfoot coming out of UFOs? Maybe, perhaps. But, why are we looking for such a complicated answer that maybe the Bigfoot's an alien? How about, that the UFOs are studying Bigfoot like they're studying us, like they're studying other things on this planet, like they've studied the cattle with, their obvious connection to cattle mutilations. We never thought for 1 minute that a cattle or a cow was an alien, right? But here we are expecting that Bigfoot's an alien, and it's, they're landing on the planet and they're running out of their craft naked. Makes no sense, especially when, if you think about it, if you're visiting a foreign world, you're not going to come out the craft naked. You're not going to breathe its air. Do you know why? Because the number one killer that will kill you quicker than anything is bacteria. Foreign bacteria that you have no resistance to. It would kill you dead. That's why there's always breathing apparatus. Obviously there's atmospheric conditions, but if we were to land on a foreign planet a million miles away that had the exact same O2 concentration that our nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide mixture on their planet as ours, we would have to wear breathing apparatus. Because the reason being is we are not immune or known to their bacterium. Our immunity is built up on exposure to this bacteria over a period of time. So that's why on our planet, a lot of things are not deadly to us. That's why when we went to communities, like when the Europeans came over to North America, there was a huge smallpox outbreak amongst the Native Americans because they had not been introduced. Their systems were not immune to that like the Europeans were. So to think that a creature would walk off, and now you're talking on a planetary scale, a creature walking out without breathing apparatus and completely naked, let alone the mosquitoes and the ticks and the chiggers and all the other parasitic leeches in the swamps, no, it would make no sense why an alien race, being intelligent as they are, coming across the universe to land here to get off their craft naked, sounds kind of silly to me. It doesn't sound realistic at all.
I tend to agree with that. And, the only time I ever have pause is I talk to witnesses. I talked to Ron Moorhead. I had Ron on the show. I love Ron. Ron has some pretty out there theories about these things. And he's had some personal experiences that have sort of led him to those beliefs. And when Ron tells those stories, he's very believable. I believe that he's had those experiences, and I think they're his experiences. I just don't know what to make of them. I've talked to people here in my home state of North Carolina, up near the Uwharrie National Forest, who have these things on their property. I talked to Dave out west who has these things on his property, and I asked him the question, have you seen lights? Have you seen orbs? And the answer was yes. And I don't know what to make of that. And it seems like it's more of a situation where there's like a habituation, or these things are uninvited onto the property and it's just an ongoing encounter. And I just find it fascinating. And I don't know if it's some kind of weird coincidence that they're having some sort of paranormal or UFO experience and there's Sasquatch there. Maybe there's a correlation that is completely unrelated. I don't know.
I tend to agree that there may be a paranormal spectrum going on, not with the Sasquatch, but on the same piece of property. I mean, especially you think, let's face it, North Carolina, I live in New York State, New England, the whole country has been inhabited by people for, several hundred years now. And we all know that there, across the plains of this land, there have been many, many droplets of bloodshed and many tragedies and many stuff like that. So I can't necessarily say that, hey, we may be looking at two separate phenomena here. But there is a lot of things which could cause somebody to have a woo-like effect. For example, infrasound. If a creature, and Dr. Meldrum and I had a long talk about that too, about infrasound. Obviously Sasquatch, to make the vocalizations it does, has very thick vocal cords, and, muscular vocal cords. So obviously they likely have this ability to use infrasound. And the funny thing is most of your biggest animal of, or your biggest creature of particular families, your biggest whales, the biggest cats, the biggest dogs, the elephant, they actually have their own family too line. They are all the biggest in their family. The blue whale, they are the biggest whale. They all have the ability to use infrasound. And it doesn't matter, if they're, what, genus they're from. What matters is that they're mammals. So all the biggest mammals have this ability to use infrasound. And what does infrasound do? It causes the ears to vibrate, causes the eyes to vibrate, It could cause hallucinations. It could cause the creeped out feeling. It could cause the feeling of mind speak. It could cause the feeling of being watched. The other thing is that you have to look at it is, okay, I'm walking down the road and I come face to face with a Sasquatch. There it is. Next thing you know, it disappears in front of me. Is that woo? No. How about it's called PTSD, or it's the way the mind treats a trauma. Similarly to people who have traumatic effects, they forget periods of time, during the attack. Like somebody will get hit over the, somebody will get assaulted and they have this period, this lapse of memory loss. Well, that memory loss is the way the brain protects it from psychological trauma. So that's another reason why people may have a woo-like experience. Well, it was there and it just disappeared.
We're totally on the same page. When I was a police officer, that was one of the things that if you were ever involved in a officer-involved shooting, you didn't give a statement immediately after the incident. You probably waited 2 to 3 days to talk to internal affairs for them to actually take your statement because of that exact effect. You forget things, you lose memory, you don't recall exactly what happened, the way that it happened. So I totally get that, and I think that's a spot-on theory. I actually had a couple of those things. I had Infrasound and a couple of things on my notes to ask you about. I can tick those off the box. So
yeah, and I think it could be a combination of both. You have this trauma, and you have this, then you have this. Now, let me explain something. There's a lot of researchers for years that have had, Ron Moorhead. I mean, I have his first 2 CDs. And he is very prominent saying, these are real flesh and blood creatures. Now he's coming up with the woo side of things. Now, I met Ron. Ron's a good guy. I believe that he believes what he had seen and what he sees. But here's the thing. There is something called PTSD. And I have seen it affect Sasquatch witnesses, certain Sasquatch witnesses, not all, but a small percentage of them, that we call it Bigfoot on the brain. They have a sighting. It's very traumatic to them. Now everything is Bigfoot. The owls in the woods. That's a Sasquatch imitating an owl. How do you know that? Have you actually seen it? Are you actually watching them make this vocalization? Right? But then there's the other crew. We've seen it happen with John Eric Beckshard years ago. Old-time researcher, flesh and blood guy, and then all of a sudden he got into all this spy strangeness. To me, this is a form of PTSD. It's frustration with not being able to reconcile their experiences, and now it's starting to eat into their mind, and now they may have their own sightings that they truly believe, but probably are not real.
I couldn't agree more, man. And that's sort of, I know we've only got a few minutes left, so I want to get into one of the big things that I know you do. Well, not big things, but I know it's one of the things that you do, and I certainly want to talk about it, is hoaxers. And kind of your last statement sort of leads me into that, because I tend to believe, not all of them, but I believe some of the hoaxers that have hoaxed evidence over the years, whether they're big, small, whether 3 people saw their evidence or 3,000 people saw their evidence that they hoaxed, I often think, and I'm asking this as a question for you, because your opinion's far more valuable than mine. I'm just speculating here. I think a lot of people who hoax start out having some sort of a genuine encounter, whether it's a vocalization, whether it's an actual sighting, something happens, and it's just never enough. And then they have to move on to something bigger and better. Particularly, I know you have sort of these boxes that you check with the different types of hoaxers out there, but I think those, for the profiteers especially, you constantly have to one-up yourself, because you're not going to make any money, or you're not going to get that 5 seconds of fame or whatever that it is without coming out with something bigger and better. I mean, have you found that over the years, or is it just they're hoaxing and that's just it?
I really think that, your profiteers are probably your least number, although they're starting to grow now with, the monetization of YouTube. Somebody can come out with a, viral video of a phony Bigfoot and get 1 million hits and monetize it. You're going to make some money. The serial profiteers, the serial hoaxers are the ones that really annoy me. The people that, there's a certain website in Oregon, Bigfoot Ballyhoo, that she's been running hoaxes now since 2009. And it's a constant fight of always saying, and every once in a while she'll throw the community a loop, and the community will forget about that she's a hoaxer, and they'll say, hey, what do you think about the Miller document? And then I have to go in there and dissect it. And it's, we have a guy from Canada, Todd Standing, who has been doing this since 2005, how it has digressed from this little magical, mystical area called Sylvanic, only being able to enter through this round entrance into a cavern and then come out on the other side into Sylvanic Valley, who, by the way, only the native Aboriginal people know. The Indians know that. Well, the funny thing is, Sylvanic is actually a Latin name. It's not a Native American name. So that's kind of problem number one right there. But yeah, and that whole thing was, and then all of a sudden, Sylvanic Video 1, which was really this hokey video, people forget. And here's this girl saying, oh, what do we have here? And all these little snow tracks that you can't really tell. And then all of a sudden you see the camera pan up and you see a tree start to shake and some snow come out. And you're, oh, and then the video cuts out. Well, the funny thing is that, Mr. Standing had an ad out looking for actors in the Edmonton newspaper just prior to that video coming out. So there's all, and then of course, you always have these headshots from the neck up, except the last one he's put out in this Discovering Bigfoot, which is actually his father, just painted up, and now you can only see from the eyes up. Of course, why? Because if you take that away, you're going to see very clearly it's his father. But I know better, and the moles kind of match up, and the hairline matches up. It's kind of funny. But we have how many, three different pictures of this Bigfoot heads, and all three look different. One looks human, one looks like a gorilla almost, and the other one looks like a Muppet. That's the best I can say. Looks like an Eskimo puppet or something like that, wearing this big furry hood. So yeah, I don't put much stock into what he does, and it's just he's doing it just to get on TV, get a little popularity, and make himself a few dollars. And of course, he's charging $3,000 a head to go on expedition with him, which from a couple of people I've heard is not the greatest of experiences, but far be it from me. But yeah, for the most part, I think the biggest of hoaxers are the ones that they don't have an experience at all. You have what I call the unintentional hoaxers that do have an experience. Then they get this PTSD and everything's a Bigfoot, and then they start seeing Bigfoot everywhere. But then you have the most numerous ones, I think, the intentional hoaxers, numerous ones, which is the people who have the psychological need to belong. And there was last year there was a Bigfoot peeper case where this guy put these pictures out, this Bigfoot looking in the window, and says and comes up with this long cockamamie story, which from a psychological standpoint makes no sense. Well, I'm sitting there and this thing looks in the window, and I have my video camera next to me on my table at problem number one.
Conveniently.
Grabs the video camera. Yeah, conveniently. Grabs the video camera. He starts videotaping it. After about 8 minutes, my wife walks in and screams, "Whoa, time out. Your wife's there? You didn't say nothing to her? You just started taping? Like, hey, honey, don't go out on the front porch. There's a Bigfoot out there." Nothing like that, right? Right? His wife comes in, screams, and runs out of the room. She calls the sheriff's department. However, he didn't say which sheriff's department she did call. So then he puts the camera down and then gets his gun. Well, why all of a sudden do you need to get your gun? Right? You've been videotaping for the last 8 minutes. Why do you need to get your gun? Again, makes no sense. And I know you as a former cop are going, yeah, something just doesn't sound right here, right? But it gets better. Is that the man is, as we will find out, doesn't own property where he says the property was. The video, aside from these few still pictures he has, the video was lost at a fire at his mom's house. And, having a pistol, a gun, he's a convicted sex offender and a convicted felon. So, and actually, he was convicted in Indiana. Supposedly this happened in Colorado. He was actually convicted in Indiana of child molestation. So, now lives in Colorado in this. And then the funny thing is I actually did my PI thing, found out where he actually lives, and you could see the lights in the back behind the creature in the window. You could actually match the lights up with the backyard lights in the backyard, from the houses across the yard. I mean, it was actually there because I was kind of like, no, it's not kind of bright light. It kind of looks like kind of darkish, orangey light. And then I realized that what that light was actually the light coming from the French doors behind his yard, looking into the backyard of his neighbor's house across the way. So, but like I said, that's a psychological need. This guy is a convicted sex offender. I'm sure he has a lot of problems integrating with people, has a lot of problems making friends because of his history. And that's a pretty tough charge to kind of say, it's okay. It's only a simple mistake. Child molestation. That's kind of not a simple mistake. So, if it had been like, well, yeah, when I was younger, I knocked off a convenience store. Okay, you were young, you were dumb, you made a mistake. When you deal with, child molestation, completely different story. So what this guy is he needed to feel, number one, he has this esteem problem. He wants to feel important. He wants to belong to a community where he can engage people, keep his mind occupied. Again, we go back to the whole primate thing, needing to keep our minds going. So what does he do? He makes up this beautiful Bigfoot story and try to act like a big hero and elevate himself into this community, which, he's trying to elevate himself into. And to me, it's just purely psychological. I don't think he was trying to lure anybody into any kind of situation. I'm not that cynical, but I think more along the lines that he just wanted to feel important and feel, happy. I mean, I've dealt with a guy who was married for 22 years, went through a divorce, and began seeing Bigfoot in different places. And his stories were not believable, but I understand why, because the guy was lonely. He wanted to feel like he needed to belong to somewhere. And in conversations with him, you could tell he was very lonely because of his divorce, kind of rocked his world. So that being said, that's why I think the main reason why people hoax is they just simply have a psychological need to belong somewhere or elevate themselves amongst and feel more important.
Yeah, I see it. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, obviously. I get in there and talk to people about their encounter stories and share the podcast and things like that. And I see it all the time with people there that are clearly posting things that they've hoaxed, right? It's clearly CG. It's clearly a bad hoaxed photo and things like that. And then there's 40,000 people in this group and they're getting 500 likes and people are like, oh my God, tell me your story. And I can see how psychologically, those types of people with those types of issues fall into that rabbit hole and start to pull people down. The thing that pisses me off about it is like you said, maybe few and far between, but it's the profiteers that everybody pays attention to. Everybody sort of props them up. There's some groups on Facebook that I just have exited out of because if you say anything about Todd Standing, they're in that, that's their guy, right? He's the king of all kings. And I think his stuff is bullshit. It is. And what pisses me off about it is he dragged two of the most, in my opinion, reputable people in the Bigfoot community ever, John Bennernagel and Jeff Meldrum, into that Discovering Bigfoot show.
And Les Stroud.
Yeah, Les Stroud. Les is coming on the show later this fall. And it fascinates me that, and then I've heard him on other shows talking about, almost getting teary-eyed about how he could never, he loves these people and he could never do anything to, tarnish their reputations and why would he fool them? And I'm just like, dude, Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles can see through your crap. And it just pisses me off that, you have good people like that go in with good intentions and do what they do. Jeff Meldrum is probably one of the straightest laced guys I've ever talked to. John Bennernagel, he is highly respected. He's highly missed, and I respect him greatly.
By the way, John actually looked at my track in 2006, which was kind of cool. He actually got a chance to look at that track when I met him back in 2006.
Well, that's awesome, man. He's definitely one of the giants, and he's going to be missed. But when you have somebody like
parse his words very well. What he said about Todd Standing's stuff is Todd apparently has caught the portrait of a Sasquatch's face. And if you look at one of the newspaper articles it even said an artistic rendition of a Sasquatch's face. So I think Todd was passing some of those off to the newspapers as artists' renditions, like the Blinky one. The blinking one came out 2 years earlier as a picture. And, of course, I actually got it from the Edmonton Sun, and when I analyzed it, you could see it was a layered picture. Some of that foliage was layered in after the original picture.
And, oh, by the way, his profession is videography. Imagine that.com.
Well, yeah, he had a very, and this is all true, he had a video company or a production company called Outstanding Productions. And a lot of his stuff was commercials done at strip clubs in Edmonton. I remember looking at this back in 2006 going, what the heck? But the interesting thing is that he used a pseudonym in Outstanding Productions, and he called himself Todd Rockwell. And that was a pseudonym of his. So why in the world would you fake your name at your own production company? Weird stuff.
Yeah, man. It just, as you can tell, you can probably hear in my voice that's one of the things that just pisses me off the most, because there's so many people out there who have genuine encounters that terrify them.
Sure.
And they're a lot of them are scared to come forward because of some of the hoaxing and some of the other things that has helped people ridicule other people who have had real experiences and real encounters with these things. And it drives me insane that somebody would try to make a buck off somebody else's back like that. It just pisses me off. And I've invited Todd Standing. If you're listening, sir, you're still welcome to come on the show and we can talk about it. But clearly he doesn't want to come on my show. But
I mean, I have a firefighter from Arizona who I've been talking with, who paid Todd $3,500 to go on like a 5-day expedition and saw nothing.
Wow.
Saw nothing. And except Todd walking around acting like some sort of Bigfoot expert. That's the kind of stuff that worries me and taking advantage. And there's been other people that have tried to take, I had this guy, and I'm not going to mention his name because I beat him up enough. But there was a guy in Texas who was doing these tours in national parks, and he ended up getting shut down. But he never returned this poor couple from Missouri. I mean, they were not rich people at all, and they had saved $1,000 up for both of them to go on his expedition. They gave him the money, getting ready, 2 months to go, and he gets shut down with a month to go because the feds arrested him for running expeditions on federal property without license or anything like that. And he never returned their money.
Wow.
So, it's stuff like that really, really makes me feel bad. And then the other thing that really aggravates me is, Todd he's not stupid. Not stupid. He's very read up on the topic, which makes him smarter than your average hoaxer. I mean, you try asking Rick Dyer about primate behavior, or why there haven't been Sasquatch bones found. You ask Tom Biscardi that. These people are notoriously of not legitimate or bona fide information providers. But you can ask Todd Standing, and actually Todd Standing gave a great answer. And that was, why haven't they found that many Gigantopithecus bones? And that made a lot of sense. He's read up. He is, he's not, that's what makes him a little more dangerous than your average hoaxer, because he knows what he's talking about. But then, you get deeper into it, he's starting to make up his own little myths. Well, that one's a sentinel, and this one's, an alpha, or, and it's dangerous. And, he starts interweaving his own fictional, his own storyline. Not as bad as quite as, Dr. Matt Johnson, who for many years, again, here's another guy that I think is suffering from Bigfoot PTSD, who to the point where he's created, Zorth, and the Bigfooter called Janu. And the Janu's natural enemy are the mean Bigfoots, the deadly Bigfoots called the Tracheon. But Zorth is the head of the Janu, and, Dr. Matt's been named part of the council. I mean, this is some crazy off the handle stuff that you go, oh, geez, kind of makes me sink into a corner a little bit.
Yeah, man, it's crazy stuff. Well, look, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And beware, hoaxers. The Squatchdetective is watching. Where can people find you, man? You got anything coming up? Any projects that you're working on? Anything?
I got tons of stuff coming up. I'm actually headed out this week to Kentucky. I'm going to be with the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization out on expedition. I'll be doing a presentation with them. We're going to be out there pounding. I can't say where, though. It's parts unknown, but somewhere in Kentucky I'll be out there, looking for the Squatches. Got my own projects. Of course, we're going to be doing our normal research in New York State as well. I got a couple of leads. I have somebody in a particular community. He's got 20 acres, and he's been having some stuff going on his property. I have another gentleman in Maine that I have to go see who's been having some stuff going on his property. The real events, because of COVID, the real events aren't starting till September 25th. I'm going to be at the Whitehall Sasquatch Calling Festival. I'll be emceeing the Calling Festival as well as giving a lecture and having a table and saying hi to the folks out there in upstate New York. On the following month, I believe it's going to be the weekend of October, I want to say 12th, will be Squatchtober. It's run by a group called Squatch, very good group. We'll be out there. I don't have the full lineup of details on that one. And then back to Kentucky again on October 21st through the 23rd. I'm going to be at Scarefest 2013. So I'll be out there doing a lecture and probably having a table and hanging out with my friends out there down in Kentucky. So that's what I got planned. But people can reach out. Of course, every Sunday night I have Squatch TV over on youtube.com/Steve Kulls. You can get more information on any of this stuff over at Squatchdetective.com, or you can go visit me at Facebook.com/Squatchdetective.
Awesome, man. I encourage everybody to go check it out. Awesome dude. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, my brother.
And that's it for this week's show, folks. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys next week.